afternoon. It really is good to be with you, and I hope to take the next few minutes to be able to discuss with you not just trends for 22 or what we should do in 22, but really to try to think about how do we look beyond where we are right now, particularly in the cyber world. And the cyber world's part of a much larger ecosphere, if you will, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'd like to break my comments into three really distinct areas. First, a little bit about history. How did we get here in the cyber world in particular? And the second part would be, where are we now and how are we doing with respect to that? And then the third part would be, so what do we do in the future based on that? When I think about history with respect to cyber, one of the things that just comes to mind is where we were 10 years ago or where we were 20 years ago. Somewhere in that time frame, we'd never even heard the word cyber. In my world, back then, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, it was information warfare in particular. And that has clearly morphed into the cyber world in really record fashion. And the reason I try to speak to that is because I think it's really important that we try to imagine where we're going to be 5, 10, even 20 years from now, particularly at the rate at which things are happening. The speed of everything is just continuing to accelerate. I worked a lot when I was in uniform with General Keith Alexander, and Keith used to talk about just the speed of the internet, to be able to counter the enemy literally at speed. And I think that's almost a minimum requirement these days, particularly as the enemy continues to advance, continues to change, continues to try to outsmart everything that we're putting in place. So it's literally the physical speed of the internet, but also the speed of change, the speed. One of the areas that's changed enormously just in the last couple of years has been the Internet of Things, the number of items that are tied to the net, and that's just going to continue. I don't see that breaking down in the future in terms of changing at all. In fact, again, back to speed, that's going to continue to happen. And every time you add another device, you theoretically you add a capability, but you also add a vulnerability. While we focus a great deal in our business on risk, I'm not sure we really do understand the risk. I've said that at a very, very high strategic level, the cybersecurity threat is an existential threat. It's an existential threat to our countries. It's an existential threat to our businesses. It's an existential threat to our way of life. And given that, do we really understand the risk? Too often, and I know to have a viable business, you have to do this, but too often it's about, and the history has been, in terms of, and sometimes in a reckless way, about sales, revenue, and growth. And clearly, those are focuses that on the business side we'll focus heavily on this year. But I'd like to move beyond that, if you will. We've also historically sort of thought IT had the answers, and if I've learned anything, particularly on the private side, in the last 10 years, that just isn't the case. In too many cases, they think they have the answers, but it's very difficult to break through that part of the organization and to integrate other capabilities from the cyber perspective in ways that really put us in a better place. I've said, I was sitting at the table in uniform as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in the United States in 2008 when the Russians attacked us very, very badly in a way that was really both eye-opening and sobering. And even in that, which resulted in dramatic a dramatic shift in strategy and in tactics for the United States military in particular. Even back then, I had this thought in my head that they're just toying with us. They're really not showing us all the capability that they have. And this is a two-way street, so it's a dangerous two-way street. And when those who attack us do, they also put themselves at risk. And there's a challenge associated with that. And I actually think we're closing the gap on that challenge, being able to identify in particular and hold accountable those who put us at risk. One of the things in particular with ITC that I'd just like to reemphasize as I've watched ITC grow here in the last couple of years has been the partnership with Microsoft, who's clearly taking the security business much more seriously than they did, many years ago. They've become in many ways the standard, if you will, as they've tried to help not just themselves, but help everybody that uses their capability ensure they're in a much better place from a security standpoint. And that has benefited as we've become part of the Microsoft security ecosystem. That has benefited Microsoft, and it certainly has benefited ITC. So as we look at what's happened in the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's been this rapid development. It's been this increasing threat. It's been this increasing capability. In this age of technology, and certainly this is the case in the cyber world, I think everything is a two-edged sword. Whatever technology gets introduced, it can be used for good and it can be used for evil. And we need to think about that as we deploy capabilities and as we try to counter capabilities. And as we ask questions about how these capabilities not just are being used now, but how these capabilities can be used down the road very specifically. The second part is, so how are we doing specifically? And when I think about how we're doing, you think about what are we doing, or I try to think about what are we doing. And I also always want to try to think about what aren't we doing? What areas of risk aren't we covering? What areas of risk aren't we talking about? Where are the gaps in our thinking? And it's not just to come up with a good idea, and I think those good ideas are really critical. It goes beyond that. It goes to the point of understanding, is there a better idea? Is there another idea? Is there space that is open that we just aren't spending much time on? And I think leadership has got to focus on those kinds of things as well. One of the areas that's very difficult in the cyber world, it's been that way from the beginning. I'm a big believer in collaboration. And one of the areas that we don't do very well is we don't collaborate very well with anybody. Too often we think we have the answers. And I recognize this is a competitive business. But I also think that collaboration on good ideas gets us better outcomes. So how do we do that and still compete from a business standpoint? That's a really, really tough question. From the beginning of the cyber challenges, so much of it has been created through vulnerabilities that are generated really in the software we write and sell and distribute, and in the hardware that we sell as well. And I felt for a long time we need to put significantly more effort into getting this right up front, so that those vulnerabilities just don't get put out there. If I had the best minds in the business applying themselves to making sure there were zero vulnerabilities in the software, I think that would dramatically reduce the opportunity for the bad guys in this. And we don't do that because that takes time, and we need to move quickly. And this, the thrust is to get it to market. And I understand that, but at the same time, or you'll get beat by the competition who isn't doing that. But I really believe in the long run, the best for our world is to be able to somehow close those loops before they ever get, or those holes or those vulnerabilities before they ever get generated. Again, this goes back to 2005, 6, 7, 8 for me, when I first really got into the information warfare, cyber warfare world. We're not going to get this right unless the C-suite really gets this. Even though this is present in every boardroom right now, really, how deeply does the C-suite team understand what's going on here? Talking about the C-suite, and I have felt for a long time that until leaders really understand the technology, that they won't make the right decisions. They won't make the best decisions with respect to hiring the right people, resourcing it correctly, and creating the right policies, and then staying with it, understanding what the risks are over time. And I've seen that in my own experience. I've seen that in boardrooms of organizations that I've been associated with, and I think that will continue to be true. In fact, the imperative of that, it strikes me as strong as it's ever been. So the C-suite's involvement here is this again is how are we doing? I think we're doing okay, but we really need to continue. We really need to improve in that area as well. And also, then, how do we make decisions with respect to this? What are our principles? What are the values? What are our beliefs with respect to cyber? And then what's the guidance that is given consistently by leaders, respectively, in this space? I felt for some time, and I hope you feel the same way, that data is the coin of the realm. And so the question around data is, how do you gather it? Where do you store it? How do you protect it specifically? And is it really secure? And how do you test that? How do you test it just internal to our own organizations? And I know that's a part of what ITC does and other organizations do to really ensure that what you have or you think you have is secure as it can be. And then really, how do you survive? And I think any company, any organization is going to survive in the cyber world mostly by putting, literally bulletproof protection on the crown jewels. So what are they? How do you protect them? How do you put them, how do you isolate them in a way that nobody can get to them except anybody that's authorized? And then how do you handle that authorization and access? And what's the technology? What's the best technology that is out there? And that's ever changing. I think Arno has listed in his recent blog trends that we kind of see that will be in play this year. What I don't know is what the trends are next year, and I don't know what the trends are 5 years from now. And I think some of what we need to do is put our best minds on what that will be. Those very rare individuals that sort of get it right in the future, engaging with them to understand what the trends are there. The recent trends, the ransomware trend is obviously going to be out there. The time to respond to a 0-day vulnerability is going to get better. It's better now than it was, and will continue because of the visibility of these issues. I think clearly there's going to be a work at home aspect of this, and as soon as you start that, plug it into my system here at my house, that's going to create vulnerabilities. How do you mitigate that? And then specifically, cyber talent's going to be harder and harder to come by, and I think we got to spend more time doing that. We just can't expect it to show up. Where is it? How do we invest in it? Can you get to education systems, or can you get to organizations that really foster young cyber talent and bring them along, invest in them, give them fellowships, give them internships, etc. And then another trend that Arno talks about is just the regulators catching up. I'm not sure. I was in government a long time. Government doesn't move quickly. And so I'm not sure regulators will be able to catch up. It's almost as if we have to anticipate where regulation is going and get there ahead of the regulators. At least that's one thought. So that's kind of a quick couple minutes on on where we are or how we're doing, kind of thing. And then what do we do about it? This is the third part I'd spend just a couple minutes on. I think, top of my list is young minds, young talent. The brilliant ones that we know are out there that are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old who are going to change the world. Go find them and engage them early and see where their minds are, because their minds oftentimes are 10 years out, etc. What's next? How do you have conversations, have debates about what's coming in 5 years, what's coming in 10 years? And almost with alternative futures, you reverse engineer that back to where we are today, which informs you on what we need to do between now and then. And you look at alternative futures with respect to outcomes and challenges and risk and vulnerabilities and how existential is it. But we've got to go do that work and then reverse engineer it. I mentioned the C-suite before. The C-suite just has to be much more engaged on this. There have to be significant strategic discussions about where this threat is going, where the technology is going, and then how do I protect myself, my company, my country, the world, against the bad guys, because the bad guys play by different rules and they're never going away. And how do we make them pay? In that regard, I think the risk is going up. It's not going down. And in particular, how do we invest in this? Across what I said, the right policies, the right people, the right technology, the right money, the right resources. How do we do that? And what is best in class? Where is best in class? Go find out what is best in class, and how do you know? We really need strategic oversight, strategic insight, and strategic minds working on this, combined with what I call tactical brilliance that can really put the ones and zeros together in a way that fortify us for the future. A goal of mine would be to put the enemy on his or her heels. I mean, flat out knock them backwards. And that's much easier said than done. But it can be done. It can be done through things like, in random employment of these kind of offensive capabilities, if you will, unpredictability, create uncertainty for the enemy, much as the enemy creates it for us. Clearly, and part of it, and this can be challenging because I've done it myself, is how to consult with futurists. They have some pretty wild ideas, but they oftentimes hit on trends that we are otherwise, not thinking about. How are we going to deal with Russia? How are we going to deal with China? How are we going to deal with the criminals, the non-state actors, etc.? Actively pursuing that, because those capabilities will continue to grow and certainly be used against us. How do we deal with China? With a company where we're invested in China and we're making good money in China, but we know they're stealing our IP. Can we do good and do well? And to me, do we as an industry think about having a moral underpinning for what we do? Or do we just write software, put it out there, and whoever gets it can use it? Because there are really bad people using good software against humans throughout the world that many of us would not sign up to. So you need to bring a conscience to this business as well. And oftentimes for us, certainly in the security world, one of the underpinning principles is, the worse it gets, the better we do. And I just don't think that's necessarily the highest moral standard, if you will. It doesn't mean that we can't develop capabilities in terms of putting the enemy on their heels, which we need to do. But we also need to think about how do we invest in a way where this challenge is minimized or certainly reduced dramatically, as opposed to growing dramatically. And is it, literally, is it possible to write software and create hardware that's not vulnerable? And how would you do that? I'd wrap up because I think all this is also captured in what's going on in the world. And oftentimes we're sort of disconnected from the standpoint how we think about this stuff. But the trends that are out there in the world are, they're pretty well established now. The haves and the have-nots, the income inequality, the political polarization, the echo chambers that too many people just sit in, not really having a reasonable across the aisle conversation, the shortage of water, the shortage of energy, what's going on in the climate world, what's going on in cities, what's going on in particular with respect to infrastructure investment and how do we play in that. Nationalism seems to be on the rise globally in many, many ways. Corruption, very much evident, almost an epidemic globally. Corruption in terms of, high level of corruption in governments and countries throughout the world, some of whom we deal with. I still think we are underplaying the potential opportunity in the talent world. And lastly, and I just hit this again, is sort of what the moral underpinning for what we do, and is there a way to do well while doing good? And leaders, I think, need to think about that. In this world that's growing in size and certainly number of people, and back to some of the trends that I talked about, is there a way to carve out a portion of what we're doing, a portion of what we're making, a portion of our profits, if you will, to impact the global world, the people who have the least among us from a social standpoint. And it's one of those things, I think the more of that we're able to do and invest there, the better the world would be in the end. So lots of challenges in the space. I'd say, you should have a great 2022. Needless to say, the last couple of years have been unexpectedly challenging. I hope we can continue to move our way through this epidemic. Is 22 the year we can actually get ahead of where we've been in the past and get ahead of what's coming next? Now, that would be the challenge. And the one way I'd really think about doing that is to go find the best minds out there, pay them well, and listen to the ideas they have about how we move ahead. Have a good 2022, and I look forward to seeing certainly some of you over the course of this year. Thanks.